pretty good team.
That was pretty. It was
What
pretty
made
decent.
that team so good, you two?
Welcome back to all Clark and USA fans. Because what just happened? It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't even official in the way people expect big moments to be. There was no press conference, no breaking news banner, no carefully crafted announcement designed to dominate headlines. Just 5 seconds. A phone camera. A viral sound. 2 players standing side by side like it was nothing. And yet somehow, it was everything. 5 seconds, that's all it took to send a message across the entire league. At first glance, it looked like just another TikTok. Something casual. Something fun. The kind of content athletes post all the time in the off-season. But within hours, that clip stopped being just a video. It became a signal. Because what people saw was simple. 2 teammates, relaxed, smiling, in sync. But what they felt underneath it, that was different. That was bigger. That was the sense that something is quietly being built in Indiana, something the rest of the league might not fully understand yet. On screen, it was Lexie Hull and Caitlin Clark. Nothing forced, nothing scripted, just natural chemistry. The kind you can't fake. The kind that only shows up when something real is forming behind the scenes. And off-screen? That's where the real story lives. Because while everyone else was focused on headlines, Indiana was focused on identity. While other teams were chasing quick fixes, the Fever were building something deeper, something sustainable. This isn't just about a moment. It's about timing. It's about positioning. It's about momentum in a league that is evolving faster than ever before. A league entering a new era financially, culturally, globally. Visibility is rising. Media attention is exploding. The stakes are higher. And in the middle of all that change, Indiana isn't reacting. They're preparing. So the real question isn't about a TikTok. The real question is this: what exactly is being built in Indiana that people will only fully recognize when it's already too late to stop it? And to understand that, you have to start with a name that didn't always get the attention it deserved. Lexie Hull. Because before this moment, before the viral clip, before the attention, she was the kind of player the casual fan might overlook. Not flashy. Not loud. Not constantly trending. Just reliable. Smart. Tough. The kind of player coaches trust without hesitation. The kind of player who does everything right, even when nobody's watching. A Stanford product. 6th overall pick in 2022. High IQ. High motor. Fundamentally sound in every aspect of the game. But for her first couple of seasons, she lived in that space the basketball world politely labels as a role player. Valuable, but not celebrated. Consistent, but not headline-worthy. She was the name you'd see in the box score and not at. Not the name you'd argue about in group chats. Not the name dominating conversations. And then, everything changed. 2025 didn't just shift her trajectory, it rewrote it completely. Because when Caitlin Clark went down with a serious groin injury, combined with bone bruising in her knee, everything about Indiana's season was supposed to collapse. That was the expectation. That was the narrative. Their franchise player, arguably the most impactful and marketable figure in the league, was suddenly out. And when that happened, the reaction across the basketball world was immediate. It's over. They're done. Start planning for next year. Every analyst said it. Every opposing team believed it. The Fever, without Clark, were supposed to fall apart before they even got started. But Lexie Hull had other plans. She didn't respond with words. She responded with performance. She stepped into a role no one had fully prepared her for and played like she had been waiting for that exact moment her entire life. No hesitation. No adjustment period. Just impact.
But they're not going to do that. And with Noelle Quinn, as you mentioned, no challenge.
Clark.
Night after night. Game after game. All 44 regular season games, she didn't miss a single one. And it wasn't just about showing up. It was about what she did when she got there. Guarding the best players. Making the right reads. Knocking down shots when it mattered. Doing all the little things that don't always make highlight reels, but absolutely win games. Her numbers improved. Her confidence grew. But more importantly, her presence changed the identity of the team. She wasn't just filling a gap. She was becoming a foundation. And when the playoffs arrived, that's when things really shifted. Because some players maintain their level under pressure, others disappear. And then there are players who rise. Hull didn't just rise, she elevated. Her production jumped. Her presence expanded. Her impact became undeniable. She played with the kind of confidence that only comes when a player knows, deep down, that this is their moment. And they're not going to waste it. Indiana pushed all the way to the semifinals, a position nobody thought they'd even come close to reaching. And even though the run ended in a heartbreaking Game 5 overtime loss, that wasn't the story people walked away with. The story was this: they were never supposed to be there in the first place. And yet they were. Because of resilience. Because of chemistry. Because of players like Lexie Hull. That playoff run changed everything, not just for Indiana, but for how the entire league viewed her. Front offices took notice. Coaches took notice. Analysts took notice. Because suddenly, this wasn't just a role player anymore. This was a player who could lead, who could anchor, who could carry. So when free agency opened, it wasn't quiet. It was intense. The phone didn't stop ringing. Multiple teams came with real offers. Not backup roles. Not limited minutes. Real opportunities. Real money. Real situations where she could be a centerpiece instead of a complementary piece. And for the first time in her career, she had options. Serious ones. The kind that would have made perfect sense if she had taken them. But Indiana understood what was at stake. This wasn't just about keeping a player. This was about protecting something much bigger. A culture. A chemistry. A locker room dynamic that had survived injuries, pressure, and expectations. Losing Hull wouldn't just impact the roster, it would disrupt something intangible. Something you can't replace with a draft pick or a trade. So the front office moved quickly. Decisively. No hesitation. They got the deal done. And just when everyone expected the usual announcement, the polished statement, the formal press release, that's when Indiana did something different. Something simple. Something powerful. They posted a TikTok. No big speech. No dramatic reveal. Just Lexie Hull and Caitlin Clark standing together, syncing to a viral sound. Tell a friend to tell a friend. She's back. 5 seconds. That's it. But in those 5 seconds, everything was said. Because it wasn't just about her returning. It was about who she returned to. It was about the connection. The chemistry. The belief in what they're building together. And if you were paying attention, you realized something. This isn't just a team anymore. This is something forming. Something dangerous. Something the rest of the league might not fully understand yet, but will soon have no choice but to deal with.
Points off of 6 fever turnovers, so that's really...
Because what you're watching right now, it's not just content, it's not just a moment, and it's definitely not random. This is how something real looks when it doesn't try too hard. No script, no rehearsal, no branding, no sponsor tags quietly sitting in the corner of the screen. Just 2 players, 2 teammates, 2 friends, sharing a life-changing moment in the most natural, unfiltered way possible. And that's exactly why it hit different. That's exactly why the internet couldn't ignore it. Within hours, what started as a simple TikTok turned into a full-blown wave. It spread everywhere, every platform, every feed, every conversation. Not because it was engineered to go viral, but because it felt real. And in today's world, real always wins. The comments alone told the story. Right at the top? Caitlin Clark herself, jumping in with that chaotic, high-energy teammate vibe, typing in all caps like she couldn't even contain the excitement. No PR filter. No polished messaging. Just raw emotion. Fans saw that and instantly connected with it. Screenshots started flying. Reposts flooded timelines. Quote tweets stacked up with emojis, fire, tears, disbelief. Every possible reaction people could express through a keyboard. Because it wasn't just content anymore. It was a feeling. It was the kind of moment you don't just watch, you experience. And here's the part most people miss. Moments like this can't be manufactured. You can't fake that kind of chemistry. You can't script that kind of connection. In an era where athlete content is carefully curated, perfectly edited, and strategically timed, 2 teammates just being genuinely happy about staying together felt rare. It cut through the noise. It stood out without trying to. And that's power. But then Caitlin Clark did something else, something small on the surface, but huge underneath. Buried in the comments, she tagged Sophie Cunningham. No long message, no explanation, just a simple, playful line. And instantly, everything shifted again. Because now it wasn't just about who's already there, it became about who might be next. Lexie Hull jumped in. Cunningham responded. The tone? Light. Playful. Almost joking. But if you were paying attention, you could see what was really happening. This wasn't just banter. This was chemistry in real time. This was the kind of interaction that turns a roster into a unit, and a unit into something stronger. A culture. And suddenly, a new question started circulating. Is Sophie Cunningham the next piece of this puzzle? Because that's how it works. Not with big announcements. Not with dramatic reveals. But with small signals that point to something bigger forming underneath. Now zoom out for a second. Because what's happening in Indiana isn't happening in isolation. You can't fully understand it unless you look at the bigger picture, the massive shift happening across the entire league. The WNBA isn't the same anymore. The economics have changed. The structure has changed. The expectations have changed. A new collective bargaining agreement has reset everything. We're not talking about small adjustments. We're talking about a complete transformation. Salary caps rising from around $1.5 million to nearly $7 million. Supermax contracts pushing into seven-figure territory. Average salaries climbing into ranges that were unthinkable just a few years ago. Even minimum salaries now sitting at levels that allow players to focus fully on their careers without needing to chase opportunities overseas just to stay financially stable. And that part matters more than people realize. Because for years, many players lived two lives, WNBA in the summer, overseas leagues in the winter. Not by choice, but by necessity. It shaped careers.
Clark, a little bit of daylight.
It affected health. It shortened longevity. That system is fading now. And in its place? A league that is finally starting to match its value with real compensation. And right at the center of that shift is Caitlin Clark. Her rookie salary didn't reflect her impact. Not even close. On paper, it looked modest. But off the court, she became a phenomenon. Endorsements, sponsorships, global attention, her influence extended far beyond the game itself. And that gap between value and compensation sparked a conversation the league could no longer ignore. How do you measure impact? How do you price influence? How do you build a system that reflects both? The new CBA is the league's answer. Because this isn't just about paying players more. It's about recognizing what they bring, not just to the court, but to the entire ecosystem of the sport. Attendance numbers, TV ratings, merchandise sales, digital engagement, everything shifted when Clark entered the league. Even during an injury-limited season, her presence alone changed the numbers. Arenas filled. Broadcasts performed better. Demand increased. That's not hype. That's data. And when one player can influence the entire economic model of a league, the system has to evolve around that reality. That's exactly what's happening now. The WNBA is no longer just growing, it's accelerating. And with that acceleration comes opportunity. Opportunity for players. Opportunity for teams. Opportunity to build something that lasts. And that brings us back to Indiana. Because while everyone is focused on the numbers, the contracts, the headlines, there's something else being built there. Something you can't measure with stats or salaries. Culture. And here's the truth people keep overlooking. The Indiana Fever are not a one-player story. They never were. 2025 proved that in the clearest way possible. Because while Caitlin Clark was sidelined, it wasn't the end of the season, it was the beginning of something unexpected. Lexie Hull didn't just step up. She took ownership. She carried the team deeper than anyone predicted. Not as a temporary solution, but as a legitimate force. That kind of performance doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from preparation. From years of doing the work when nobody's watching. From understanding the game at a level that goes beyond highlights and headlines. And when the moment finally arrived, when the spotlight shifted, she didn't hesitate. She delivered. Game after game. Possession after possession. under pressure that would break most players. That's not luck. That's not timing. That's readiness. And now imagine what happens when that version of Lexie Hull is no longer filling in, but playing alongside a fully healthy Caitlin Clark. That's where things get dangerous. Because now you're not looking at a team trying to survive. You're looking at a team that already proved it can win under pressure, adding back one of the most impactful players in the game. That's not rebuilding. That's evolving. And when you combine talent, chemistry, timing, and a league that's entering a completely new era, you start to see the bigger picture. This isn't just about what Indiana is right now. It's about what they're becoming. Something real. Something connected. Something the rest of the league is starting to notice, but might already be too late to stop.
For the Liberty, so let's see if they can have a better one here today as Clark finds.
Because what we are witnessing right now in Indiana isn't just basketball anymore. It's not just a roster update, not just a viral clip, and definitely not just another off-season headline. It's something deeper. Something that feels like it's being built quietly in real time, piece by piece, moment by moment, until suddenly you realize it was never just about one player or one season. It was about an entire direction changing. It all started with something so small that most people almost missed it. 5 seconds. That's it. No press conference. No scripted announcement. No media rollout. No corporate branding layered over emotion. Just a simple TikTok. A phone camera. A trending sound. 2 teammates standing together in sync, not performing for the world, but simply existing in a moment that felt real. And that's exactly why it exploded. Because in today's sports world, everything is controlled. Everything is polished. Every post is planned, approved, edited, and aligned with brand identity. Athletes don't just post anymore, they produce content. Every smile is calculated. Every caption is filtered through media teams. Every moment is designed to say something without actually saying anything. But this was different. This wasn't production. This was presence. 2 teammates, Lexie Hull and Caitlin Clark, sharing a moment that didn't feel like marketing, didn't feel like strategy, didn't feel like anything except genuine connection. And the internet reacted instantly. Not because it was loud, but because it was honest. Within hours, it spread everywhere. Not slowly, not gradually, but all at once, like a signal being picked up across every platform simultaneously. Fans didn't just watch it, they felt it. They replayed it. They clipped it. They quoted it. They turned it into memes, reactions, breakdowns, emotional threads, and highlight-style edits that made a 5-second clip feel like a cultural moment. And right at the center of it all, Caitlin Clark herself. Commenting. Engaging. Not as a brand ambassador. Not as a corporate figure. But as a teammate. As a friend. Typing in all caps with chaotic energy that instantly reminded everyone that beneath the fame, beneath the endorsements, beneath the global spotlight, she is still a competitor who lives inside the locker room just like everyone else. That one comment alone shifted the energy of the entire moment. Because suddenly, it wasn't just a video anymore. It was validation. It was connection. It was proof that the chemistry fans suspected wasn't imagined, it was real. And then came the second wave. Clark didn't stop there. Buried in the comments section, she tagged Sophie Cunningham. Casual. Playful. Almost joking, but not meaningless. Because in professional sports, even jokes inside team ecosystems carry weight. Lexie Hull responded instantly. Cunningham replied back. The tone stayed light, but the implications grew heavier. Because now it wasn't just about 2 teammates celebrating. It was about potential expansion, a network forming, a culture pulling people in. And suddenly, every fan started asking the same question out loud. Is this the next move? Is Sophie Cunningham the next piece? Not because anything was confirmed, but because the chemistry felt too natural to ignore. And that's where this story stops being about a TikTok entirely. Because this moment is actually just the surface layer of something much bigger happening underneath. A transformation. Not just in Indiana, but in the entire league. The WNBA is not the same league it was even 2 years ago. It is expanding, financially and culturally, at a speed it has never experienced before. A new collective bargaining agreement has reshaped the entire economic foundation of the sport. Salary caps rising dramatically. Supermax deals reaching levels once considered impossible. Minimum salaries increasing to a point where players no longer need to rely on overseas contracts just to survive the off-season. This is not a small adjustment. This is a structural reset. And resets change everything. For years, women's professional basketball operated under a dual-system reality. WNBA in the summer, overseas leagues in the winter. Players didn't just compete for championships, they competed for financial stability. They lived two careers at once. That era is now fading. And in its place, a league that finally reflects its value. But to understand why Indiana sits at the center of this conversation, you have to understand what happened on the court first. Because while the business side of the league was evolving, something unexpected was happening inside the Fever organization. A quiet transformation. One that nobody fully predicted. When Caitlin Clark went down with injury during the 2025 season, the narrative around Indiana was immediate and harsh. Analysts wrote them off. Opponents circled them as a guaranteed win. The assumption was simple. Without their franchise centerpiece, the team would collapse.
That's why I carry my tape measure around, Pat. Sometimes shots.
Season over. Rebuild mode. Move on. But basketball doesn't always follow assumptions. Because instead of collapsing, Indiana adapted. And at the center of that adaptation was Lexie Hull. Not the most famous name. Not the most marketed player. Not the face of the franchise. But suddenly, the most important. She stepped into a role nobody explicitly gave her, but one the team desperately needed filled. And instead of struggling under pressure, she elevated under it. Game after game, possession after possession, she became stability in chaos, defense, shooting, decision-making, energy, consistency. Not flashy dominance, but reliable control. And in a season where expectations were falling apart everywhere else, she held the structure together. That's the detail most people miss. It wasn't just that she played well. It's that she didn't let everything fall apart. And when the playoffs arrived, the story shifted again. Because now it wasn't about survival. It was about proving legitimacy. And Indiana did more than survive. They advanced. They pushed into a semifinal run that nobody had predicted, nobody had modeled, and nobody had truly prepared for. And even though it ended in heartbreak, one of those narrow, exhausting losses that linger longer than blowouts ever do, it didn't feel like failure. It felt like arrival. Because suddenly, the conversation changed. Not, how did they collapse? But how did they get this far? And the answer kept circling back to one name. Lexie Hull. Which is why free agency didn't just become a routine off-season moment. It became a pressure test. Because now other teams saw what she had become. Not a supporting piece. Not a rotational player. But a legitimate impact wing capable of shifting playoff outcomes. Offers came in. Real offers. Starting roles. Bigger money. Bigger responsibility. And for the first time in her career, leaving Indiana made sense on paper. But she didn't leave. She stayed. And that decision matters more than most people realize. Because in modern sports, loyalty is rare, but belief is rarer. Her official statement was simple. No drama. No theatrics. No emotional over-explaining. Just clarity. Indiana is home. There is unfinished business. And that phrase, unfinished business, is not casual language. That is competitive memory. That is a team remembering how close they were. That is a locker room that has already tasted what almost feels like. And almost is dangerous. Because almost creates obsession. Almost creates urgency. Almost creates teams that stop thinking about participation and start thinking about finishing. And then there's Caitlin Clark. The gravitational force around everything. Her presence changes arenas. Her presence changes ratings. Her presence changes ticket demand, broadcast scheduling, merchandise cycles, and even venue capacity decisions. Even when injured, her influence didn't disappear. It expanded. That is not narrative. That is measurable impact. And that impact is part of why the league itself is changing. Because when one player consistently shifts economic behavior across an entire league, the structure must adjust around her existence. That is what the new CBA reflects. A league finally aligning value with visibility. But here's the part that matters most, and the part people often overlook when they focus only on stars. Indiana is not just Caitlin Clark. And it never was. Because what 2025 proved, more than anything else, is that this is a system, not a single-player story. A system where Lexie Hull can step into pressure and stabilize a franchise. Where Aaliyah Boston anchors the paint with all-star consistency. Where Kelsey Mitchell provides scoring gravity that forces defensive collapse. Where role players evolve into postseason difference makers. And where chemistry becomes a competitive weapon. That is the foundation being built. Not hype. Not narrative. Structure. And structure wins when pressure arrives. Add a fully healthy Caitlin Clark back into that environment, and suddenly the conversation shifts again, not from can they compete, but how far can this go? And that is where the fear starts for the rest of the league. Because this is no longer a rebuilding team. This is a team that has already experienced deep playoff pressure, already felt the margin of victory shrink to possessions, already lived through elimination-level intensity. They have been tested. They have been exposed. They have been rebuilt through experience. And now they return with continuity, with chemistry, with belief, and with something even more dangerous than talent alone. Memory. Memory of what it feels like to be one possession away from everything. And that brings us back to that 5-second TikTok. Because what looked like a simple clip was never just content. It was a signal that this locker room is connected, a signal that the culture is real, a signal that the chemistry is not manufactured, and most importantly, a signal that something is forming in Indiana that the rest of the league will eventually have to deal with. Not later, not eventually, but sooner than expected. Because in leagues like this, turning points rarely announce themselves loudly. They show up quietly, in 5 seconds. And by the time everyone realizes what they were watching, it's already too late to stop it.